All right, welcome to Kabbalah Café. Very special class today. So we're going to talk about a topic to kind of continue what we did last week and take the conversation a little bit further. So our topic this week today is the day tragedy struck, and the context is the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, of the Holy Tabernacle, that happened in the year 2448 from creation. So to give you a little bit of to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of context. So what happened was, the Exodus from Egypt. We always start, it's always a great place to start. The Exodus. Shortly after the Exodus, the Jewish people received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Shortly after, the Torah was received at Mount Sinai. In fact, it was very shortly after the Torah was received at Sinai. Less than 40 days later was the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf, where the Jewish people created and worshipped a golden calf, declaring it the God of Israel. Can you imagine? 40 days, little less than 40 days. After hearing God say, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods, do not create any images or worship them, etc. 40 days later, there they are with a golden calf, worshiping it and declaring it the God of Israel. It is something so confounding, something so impossible, it almost defies belief, and yet it happened. And yet in our own lives, we also find parallels to this. Sometimes we have truths and things are clear. We have epiphanies, moments of clarity. Moments of truth. We're like, at this point, I know what's real. I know what's what, and I'll never revert back into shtuyot. How do we translate shtuyot? Nonsense. I'm not going to go back into nonsense. I have clarity. And then we find ourselves somehow wading back in, unfortunately, into shtuyot, into nonsense, even though we had moments of clarity, and it's a cautionary tale. And so, as a national rehabilitation project, and to create space for God on earth, God gave the Jewish people the commandment to build a Mishkan. Yeah.
So it does bother me because that was 40 days after they left Egypt, and they had to be convinced there was a real God.
It was 50 days plus 40 days, 90 days, 3 months, still very short.
But they went through the 10 plagues,
Mhm.
and that convinced them that something was going on.
But it was a mixed multitude. It wasn't the actual Jews.
It seems like 90 days they went from one extreme.
And not everyone did.
Again, listen, as Belinda's saying, maybe it was the mixed multitude, the Egyptians that had joined the Jews. Maybe it was, I actually prefer the line of reasoning that says, give me 90 days and I can convince you out of your deepest seated truths. Give me 90 minutes, right? 90 minutes after Yom Kippur sometimes, we're back where we started from. I'm not trying to be cynical or negative or whatever. I'm just saying, see, part of the human nature. I understand the question, but anyway, but that's not really the focus of today's class. Focus of today's class, and the truth is, I'll be honest, we had a series, Kabbalah Café, we had a Sunday morning series that we studied for months, all about that question: how could the Jews have worshipped the golden calf? That's it's not for today. Yeah, at some point we'll repeat it. It's good to repeat. But the real focus of today is on what happens next, which is this national, project of building a Mishkan, building a tabernacle, a portable sanctuary. God utters those words that reverberate through history, v'asu li mikdash, and they shall make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell amongst them. And this becomes the call to build a space, to build a home for God. And it took a while. They had to collect all the donations and then fashion the gold, silver, copper, and other materials into a home for God per divine specs, right? Think about building, right? Think about if your contractor is God, it's going to be, or Moses or Betzal, whatever the roles were, certainly a very, very exacting project. You can't come in over budget. You can't come in late. You can't come in. Well, we added, we couldn't put in the windows there, so we moved them here. That's not going to work, right? In God's space, you can't have any deviations from the plan. And it is finally completed. 7 days of inauguration, where there's kind of a trial run, lahavdil, to create a vast difference between Kodesh and Chol, between holy and the mundane. When you have lahavdil, a restaurant that opens up, oftentimes they do there's a word for it. They do soft opening. There you go. Where they'll be open for 2 hours and you can get discounted pizza or burgers, not at the same place because, they're greasing the wheels. Lahavdil, 7 days of inauguration, where Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself, put up the Mishkan, erected it in the morning, did the service. He wasn't a Kohen, but for those 7 days, he acted like a Kohen, made sure the altar worked, the fire was burning, got everything to 7 days. And on the 8th day, by Yom HaShmini, the 8th day, that was the day that the Mishkan opened for business. The ribbon cutting with the balloon drop and the confetti spray, all that happened on the first day of Nisan in the year 2449 from creation. The Exodus happened the 15th of Nisan, 2448. Sandrine, good morning. Good to see you. So this is just 2 weeks shy of the first anniversary of the Exodus. That is opening day of the Mishkan after the 7 days of inauguration, the opening day. And the Torah tells us on that day, it was a day of great celebration, great fanfare. Aaron HaKohen, Moses' brother. By the way, now if you're following the weekly Torah portion, we're talking about, now we're getting into the plagues. Speaking of the plagues, we read about 7 plagues. We read about the first 7 plagues yesterday. We now have this week, the Torah portion has the final 3 plagues, along with the actual Exodus, right? All of that is happening this week. Next week will be, sorry for the spoiler, will be the splitting of the sea. The week after will be Sinai. There's a lot of action going on here. But I mentioned this because Moses and Aaron, they shared responsibility. When they're going to Pharaoh, they both show up. When it comes to, I don't know what the best way to say this, performing the plagues, sounds like a play. Well, when it comes to, facilitating the plagues, obviously they came from God, but on the ground, Moses does some, Aaron does some. They split the roles. They each have their own space. Well, when it comes to the Mishkan, when it comes to the tabernacle, the first Kohen in history, in fact, the first Kohen Gadol, the first high priest, or as we call him, the big kahuna, is Aaron. Moses, as I mentioned, did the inauguration for the first 7 days, the soft opening of the Mishkan for 7 days. On the 8th day, he passed the baton to Aaron, to his brother, saying, now it's your show. And the Torah portion opens up. Torah portion called Shmini opens up and says that Aaron was afraid to approach. He was afraid. Why was he afraid? Rashi says he had still pangs of whatever emotion from the experience of the golden calf. If you recall, the golden calf happened when the people complained to Aaron. Moses had been on the mountain for what they thought was 40 days and 40 nights, although they had miscalculated by 1 day. They counted the day that he went up as day 1, but it wasn't a full day because he went up, in the morning or whatever, late morning. It wasn't a full day. But anyway, according to their calculation, 40 days had passed. They go to Aaron and they say to Aaron, what are we going to do? Moses is gone. We need a new leader. Aaron says, bring me the gold. Bring me gold, and we'll make something happen. They bring the gold. He throws into the fire, and out comes a golden calf. Now, the commentators explain that he wasn't intending on actually creating an idol. He wasn't intending on helping them worship an idol. On the contrary, he was trying to push them off. He figured if he would ask for gold, it would take a few days. By that time, Moses would be back. He didn't realize how excited they were about this project of donating gold. By the way, the tikkun, the fix, the repair is always the same as the problem. You fix something in the place that it's broken, right? If something breaks and you put glue somewhere else, you haven't fixed the problem. You always fix any tikkun, any fix has to be in the space where the breach, where the break happened. So the repair of the alacrity, the excitement of donating gold for the golden calf comes in the form of donating gold for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. That's kind of like the tikkun, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. The fix happens over there. But back to the point, Aaron now is standing by the altar, and he is going through an emotional moment where he's afraid, he feels embarrassed, he feels like, who is he to be the one to stand up and say, not that he would actually declare this, but to be the one, the face of the Mishkan. He felt unworthy. And Moses says to him, approach. This is exactly why you were chosen. And there's two understandings. This is why you were chosen. Two understandings. Either you were chosen for this, embrace it, this is your job, go for it. Or the very fact that you're hesitant, the very fact that you're not, yes, this is my show, the very fact that you approach with humility, with a sense of unworthiness, that's exactly why you're chosen for the show. We don't want someone that runs after power. We don't want someone that runs after honor and glory. We want someone who would rather not be the face. That's who you want as your leader, somebody who doesn't want to be the leader. Look at all the great leaders of the Jewish people. They always ran away from honor. Back to the story. And so everything starts progressing, and the day's activities, it wasn't a bounce castle, don't worry, but the day's service goes on, sacrifices are brought, and then the Torah tells us the following. The Torah tells us that the two sons of Aaron, I'm actually going to pull it up for myself over here, because I want to read the actual words here. The good news is that at this point in life, all you have to do is type in Shmini Chabad, Chabad.org pops up, you click it, and the next thing you know, it's right here. The power of the interwebs. Okay, so this is Leviticus chapter 9. And
Leviticus is Shemot?
No, this is in the book of Leviticus already. And here's what happens. Moses said to Aaron, approach the altar. Krav el hamizbeach, approach the altar and offer up your sin offering and your ascent offering, atoning for yourself and for the people, and offer up the people sacrifice atoning for them as God has commanded. Aaron approached the altar and slaughtered his sin offering calf. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger into the blood. All right. Let me fast forward here a little bit. Okay. Second reading. Let's continue. Leviticus.
What is Leviticus in Hebrew?
Vayikra. At the end of Shemot, at the end of Exodus, is when they finally have built the Mishkan, but it's not inaugural. We don't read. And then Leviticus opens with, well, now you have a building. What do you do in there? So it talks about the various offerings. And then it circles back to, so it gets technical, the first few portions. Then it circles back to the narrative of, well, then this is how it played out. All right. It's now that, so then it's a long process of discussing, what they did. After they did all of the offerings, it says Aaron lifted his hands lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. He descended from the altar after having offered up the sin offering, the ascent offering, the peace offering. Moses and Aaron went. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. They came out and blessed the people, and the glory of God appeared to all the people. So all seems well. In other words, they had a job, they had a task, they brought the offerings, they then blessed the people, and everything was good. Then there is, in the third reading, the most a very interesting verse. And it would be more interesting if I had this printed out in advance, but I don't. And so you're hearing it, but it's different than seeing it. But nonetheless, if you can imagine this, the third reading opens with, and the English chapter and verse is chapter 9, verse 24. And it reads, fire went forth from before God and consumed the ascent offering and the fats upon the altar. All the people saw this, saying praises and fell upon their faces, prostrated themselves, bowing down to God. Then the very next verse is Leviticus chapter 10, verse number 1. So it's interesting how, the chapter and verse, the third is not aligned with the reading. The reading is, anyway, it's easier if you see it. Anyway, so chapter 10 opens up like this. Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took a fire pan, put coals that were on fire in it, placed incense upon the fire, and brought before God a fire that was foreign, since he had not commanded them to offer it up. So the way the Torah describes it, they brought a fire pan, meaning like a pan that had coals on it, and put incense upon it. So in other words, it was an incense pan, essentially, and brought this offering to God, but it had not been commanded of them to do so. The very next verse says, chapter 10, verse 2, fire, vatetze eish milufnei Hashem. Fire went forth from before God, vatochal otam, and consumed them, and they died before God. This is in literary, not contrast, but in literary symmetry with the opening verse of this reading, etc. That a fire went out before God and ate the sin offering and the fats that were on the altar, etc. And now we have 3 verses later, a fire going out from before God and eating/consuming them. The 2 sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, the 2 oldest sons. And they died before God. Okay, so here in the third reading, at the opening of the third reading, the third section of the Torah portion of Shmini, we have the tragedy, the death of Aaron's 2 oldest sons, Nadav and Avihu, on the day and at the height of celebration. And the commentaries struggle with this because clearly this is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy of just absolute immense proportion. And the Torah is a little bit vague as to what is going on here. I mean, it says that they brought an offering that they were not requested to bring. It does say that. But is that grounds for losing one's life at the height of celebration, coupled with the, I don't know if the right word is ironic twist, but it's almost like foreshadowing of how apprehensive Aaron was on this day? How he had this uneasy feeling about this whole thing. And then on this very day, he loses his 2 sons. There's so many angles with which through which to explore this. And then a few verses later, after this tragedy, God spoke to Aaron saying, and if you read a little bit of Torah, you know that that's very unusual. Vayidabra Hashem al Aaron lemar. When does it say that? It says Vayidabra Hashem al Moshe lemar. God always speaks to Moses, and then Moses conveys it to the relevant party. God speaking, giving a mitzvah directly to another party is exceptionally rare. Vayidabra Hashem al Aaron lemar. God speaks to Aaron. What does he say? This is a few verses. This is verse 8. The passing happens in verse 2. This is 6 verses later. So what does God say? Do not drink wine in such a way that will lead to intoxication. Neither you nor your sons with you when you enter the tent of meeting. Tent of meeting is referring to the Mishkan, so that you do not die. What's the implication? That if you were intoxicated when you went in,
I think the sons were intoxicated.
So this is now a clue, right? Listen, and God continues, and this is an eternal statute for your generations. Only when you are sober, it is relevant for you to distinguish between which actions render the sacrifices holy and which are profane, between priests who are richly defiled, those who are not richly defiled, etc. So you can't be intoxicated, otherwise, lest you die. Again, the implication is that if you're intoxicated, you die. No, the commentaries wonder. So why is this warning right after the passing of Aaron's sons? And many say, well, I guess it's trying to tell us that maybe that was what happened. Maybe they were intoxicated. right? Maybe they were intoxicated. Huh? You don't like this? Which part?
What they did, they did it with faith. They didn't know that this was something that God would put in.
Oh, that's a good question.
But what did they say? Ignorance is
It is.
what happened to the law. But
Well-
then, if you don't know it, nothing can be brought to your attention, and you don't know it.
Right? How can you be held? Yeah. So I want to read Rashi. I'm going to read some Rashi on the verse that says fire went forth, the verse that talks about their passing. Rabbi Eliezer says, this is Rashi quoting the Talmud or the Midrash. Rabbi Eliezer says, the sons of Aaron died because they decided a matter of halacha to offer up the incense in the presence of their teacher, Moses. They decided something without asking Moses. So for that, they deserve the punishment. They deserved, or they died because of that. Rabbi Ishmael says, this is all Rashi. Second reason. They died because they entered the sanctuary after drinking wine. Now, you know this is so because after their death, God warned those remaining not to enter the sanctuary after drinking wine. Doesn't sound fair. Too little, too late. About this, there's a parable of a king who had a household member, as stated in Vayikra Rabbah. He alludes to a midrashic parable. And there, the midrashic parable, it's not here in the footnotes, but in the midrashic parable, if I recall correctly, it says, imagine you tell somebody, this is unhealthy for you. Either they'll listen or they won't listen. But imagine if you say, this is unhealthy, and the last person who did it didn't make it. Now you're paying attention. Doesn't help the first guy. I agree with you. So Rashi here brings two different positions. He brings Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Ishmael. By the way, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Ishmael, these are two of the giants of the Mishnah. And in case you're wondering, what's the Mishnah? Do I have a course for you, decoding the Talmud? Opa, this is a course that you're going to love. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer says it's because they paskin, they rendered a halachic decision without consulting the chief, without consulting Moses. Rabbi Shmuel says they were intoxicated. Others give other reasons. There are commentaries that give multiple reasons or rationales for the passing of the two sons of Aaron. But I want to share with you today what the Or HaChaim HaKadosh says. The Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar, was a Moroccan Kabbalist and commentary who lived in the 16 and 1700s, one of the greatest scholars of his time, and someone who wove together both the literal and the mystical in his commentary that stands today as a very unique biblical Torah commentary. And he writes the following. He says, what actually happened? What actually happened is that they experienced something that is known as Klot HaNefesh. Klot HaNefesh. I don't know if it's a modern Hebrew word, Chaf Lamed Vav Taf. Is that a modern Hebrew word? Klot. It's the best way I could say it in English is their souls leaped out of their bodies. Their souls got so excited about God, that the soul leaped out of their bodies to reconnect with the source. So what is this? What does that mean? How did this happen? So as we've discussed many times in this class and other classes, the relationship, or more precisely, the integration, the collaboration between body and soul is very tenuous at best. In other words, it's a highly precarious
Bond.
bond. It's highly precarious because each component is pulling in a different direction. The soul is pulling up, the body is pulling down. All the way at the beginning of the Torah tells us, Vayitzar Hashem et ha'adam afar min ha'aretz. That God formed Adam from the dust of the earth and then blew into Adam's nostrils a breath of life, which means that the human being is an amalgam, a combination of two components, a body that comes from the earth and a soul that comes from heaven. And each one doesn't only come from a different planet, not literally planet, but a different reality, but they also possess completely different qualities, completely different tendencies. You know that book? Remember that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? Remember that one? Great. It's worse. It's not just two different planets. It's completely two different realities, right? The neshama, the soul, comes from heaven and wants God and wants to be surrendered to God and wants to be back in the source. And the body wants to be more of itself. The body just wants to be. Bodies, right, from the earth want to express being.
If they were so excited about connecting with God, did their soul disintegrate with their body, or the soul separated from the body and connected?
So souls can't disintegrate because it's not something disintegratable. But what happened is the way the Ar Chaim explains, and the way Kabbalah and Chassidut explains, is that imagine you have a large fire, and then you take a smaller fire, like a candle, and place it in proximity to the large fire. What will always happen is that your small fire will actually start leaning into the large fire. You can try it at home. Take like a Havdalah candle and then a Hanukkah candle and hold one toward the other, and you'll see it'll actually almost start merging into the larger fire. That is the nature of fire. It actually wants, a smaller fire wants to become part of the larger fire. That's its nature. The soul by its nature wants to return to its source. The body by its nature wants to be. So there's always a very precarious bond between body and soul. It's super precarious. That's the explanation on a deeper level of one of the blessings that we recite every single day, perhaps even multiple times a day. It's the blessing that's recited in the morning, and after going to the bathroom, to the restroom. It's a blessing that concludes, the phraseology is mafli lasot. I think that's the phraseology, and it's basically expressing how God performs wonders, how there's like a wonder, miracles with the human body, with human life. What's the wonder? The wonder is how a soul that comes from heaven is ever held down or contained within a body. It almost doesn't make sense. How could a body contain a soul? It almost doesn't make sense. So what happened? What happened was that the souls of these two sons of Aaron were so excited, spiritually excited, on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. Rofei kol basar u'mafli la'asot. That's the blessing. They were so excited about the experience, the spirit. They were on such a spiritual high, their bodies could no longer contain their souls, and their souls leaped out of their bodies. The body couldn't hold back the excitement of the soul. And that's what it means that a fire came down and consumed the soul. What does that mean? The large divine fire was that which excited the individual fire of their souls, and the soul flew up, as it were, from the wick, which is in this analogy, which is the body. And the way Chassidut explains, so Shane is asking, so that makes sense, but why the alcohol warning? Because what is the alcohol? It's the same thing. Same thing. This is spiritual intoxication. Now, as yayin, as wine is to physical intoxication, this experience is to spiritual intoxication. What is intoxication? Getting high, right? It's wanting to go beyond the normative experience, wanting to go up, wanting to leave, rational thought or whatever it is. You want to get high. They wanted to get spiritually high. That's what they wanted. And you know what? They got what they wanted. They literally got what they wanted.
But do you have to get a physical high to get a spiritual high?
I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that's the case. The way I'm not going to comment. This is not a practical guide for that. No, but in all seriousness, the way the mystics explain the idea, the incense and the alcohol, they say that basically the mystics take all 4, 5, 6, 7 different angles that the commentaries point out and explain it spiritually, how it's all speaking to the same truth. They wanted something, they wanted an experience that their bodies couldn't handle, their bodies couldn't take. I shared this once in a Sunday morning Kabbalah class. I once heard a podcast, and it's a podcast that questions things that sometimes people don't question, but it's a question that many of us have. And this has to do with substances, and and then I guess trigger warning if that's a thing that needs to be said. But here we go. Fentanyl is killing a lot of people. Yeah. And lots of drugs now sometimes are laced with fentanyl. It's killing people. And so the podcast explored the question, who's putting the fentanyl in and why? What kind of business model is it to kill your customer? That sounds like a very poor business model. You with me on the question? Yeah. I thought it was a great question. Someone who's, not in the field, right? It actually seems like a very logical question. Why would you put something in it that then ends your customer's life? That makes no sense. And so some research, and one of the angles on this, many different angles. One is to differentiate your product from another product. One is, there are many, it gives a different, anyway, but one of the angles, no, right. No, but it's to make the core thing a little bit different. But the thing that really struck me, they interviewed this guy who used to be hooked on it, and he said, if you tell someone that, you have to understand what is going through the mind, what is going through the psyche. Person says this is real, this is not real. Everyone thinks that those guys aren't real. They're saying this is not real. This life, why is this real? They want to get closer. They want to get higher. They want to feel something more magical. You tell someone that there's something that can get you so close to the edge, right? To touch the whatever it is, touch this pure place of what that some people, even it takes them over the edge. That's not a what's it called again? That doesn't scare somebody away. That's something that gets you so Nadav and Avihu, they wanted to get so high, they went to the other side. They wanted that high. They were so excited about God. They were so excited about spirituality. They wanted that high, and they take me over the edge. And they went over the edge. And that means death. For them, that was death. They went over the edge. So was it physical intoxication, spiritual intoxication? One could argue, again, I don't mean with the actual substance. Is it really fundamentally different? In other words, if it's all about a desire to leave this behind, leave this grind, leave this chaos and darkness and beyond, and have an experience of pure pleasure and bliss and something higher, spiritual, whatever, that's what they wanted. And that's what they got. Ultimately, it was a mistake. Huh? Spirit. Yeah, you could say that. Sure. Yeah. But they didn't look at it as a death wish. They looked at it as a connection wish. They wanted to be connected to the ultimate source. Is that a death wish? Well, it means discarding the body, but it's not a death wish. It was a connection wish. They wanted to be connected. Ultimately, though, it's not the ideal. Why is it not the ideal? Because, which I think you're touching on, The purpose for which God put the body into the soul. Why does God put together body and soul? Not for the soul to escape. It's not like it's a big contest. Who can escape first? That's not what life is. Maybe one could have believed that that's what life is. Maybe God puts the soul here and says, can you break out? But that's not the Jewish understanding of life. Life is understanding that the soul is here for a mission. The soul is here for a purpose. The soul is here despite the chaos of the body and the animal soul and the world we live in Olam HaSheker, a world of falsehood and lies, a world of darkness and coldness, etc. Despite all of that the soul should generate some light and warmth below, not to escape and leave it behind. That's not the purpose, but that's what they wanted. That is clearly what they wanted. They got what they wanted. It wasn't ideal. Thus God says, Yain v'shecher al teish. You should not get intoxicated, right? Don't get so high. Don't get so intoxicated that you lose focus of what you're here for. The goal is not to escape. The goal is to be present until such time that our mission is completed. But we are not the ones to say, I want out. That's not the ideal. And yet,
What about intoxication in the sanctuary on Purim?
Oh, you're saying literal intoxication?
Ad lo yada.
Ad lo yada. Until you don't know the difference between Purim and Chanukah, no, between Haman and Mordechai. Right, how do you explain actual intoxication? Good. So narrowly, in other words, literally, the prohibition in the Torah is if you're a Kohen and you have a holy temple and you're serving in the temple, then you can't be intoxicated. But, so that would not refer necessarily to the average person nowadays. I won't say average, anyone nowadays, even in a synagogue, it's not the same as the holy temple. It's a different level of whatever. Like the holy temple, you also couldn't be impure and walk in. That was also liable for, for the death penalty or for God, taking out that person. Today, we're all in a state of ritual impurity and, we show up to synagogue. So it's not, we've all been around death, unfortunately. So it's not necessarily the same thing. Although in concept, you might not be, you're raising a good question. How do we explain that whole, whether we call it culture, that directive? Okay, we have to say a little l'chaim and then talk about it. Kidding. Anyway.
I've seen this year in some synagogue, the rabbi sending a message ahead.
In moderation.
Reminding,
Yeah. I think moderation is always a good thing. As a moderate myself, I am pro moderation. But so the key idea that I wanted to bring out from this story is the notion of the spiritual desire that is so powerful that in the case of Nadav and Avihu, it led to their actual passing. Because what is death? Death is a separation of body and soul. Sometimes it happens because the body becomes too weak or too frail or too injured, God forbid, to hold the soul, right? The wick becomes so compromised that the flame is no longer, there's nothing to attach to anymore. There's nothing holding it back. Sometimes it works the other way, where the soul is so energized or so, I don't know the right word, but so inspired, the flame is so inspired that it jumps almost from the wick. That's another form of passing, obviously a rare form. But in mystical parlance, in mystical language, vernacular, it's called klot hanefesh. I've seen it as, in English, as expiation of the soul or expiration of the soul. I don't know exactly the etymology of the word, but it means this experience where there's such gaguyim, there's such yearning and desire and whatever that it almost like the container can't hold it back. The excitement is too big for the moment. There's too much light and not enough vessel almost. It's like there's too much excitement, spiritual excitement.
So what they did was a positive or negative?
Ultimately, it's a negative. It's a negative because the purpose of life is to be here until God calls us back. The purpose of life is not to escape life, even if it's for spiritual reasons. We still might call that spiritual selfishness. Ultimately, why is it selfish? Because it's about how the soul feels, and it's not thinking about, well, what does God want us to do? Like, what's the purpose of why we're here? Right? We're not here to indulge in our own selves, even if it's the spiritual desire. But anyway, but that being said, this story represents a very powerful spiritual yearning and something that is really inherent to the soul, if not for the soul's almost checks and balances on itself, to remember and recall that it's not here to indulge its own spiritual delight, but rather it's here to perform a mission below, together with the body and the animal soul in this world, etc. That's the purpose. But the desire is innate and natural to the soul. You have other stories, and we've gone through some of these stories before in previous series of Kabbalah Café. Story that the Talmud says, Arba nechnas lepardes, 4 went into the orchard. And the orchard means they had a mystical experience of study or just experience. 1 died, 1 became a heretic, 1 lost his mind, and only Rabbi Akiva, nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom, he entered in peace and came out in peace. And 3 out of 4 didn't make it. You know, when you have a very powerful spiritual experience, oftentimes it becomes very it becomes too much to bear. I will say, I referenced Yom Kippur before in a different context, but I'll reference it again. There's a subtler form of this that I think we're more used to. You know, if we understand that this concept is that the soul gets so excited that it leaves the body, well, if we take that basic construct out from its literal form of actually leaving the body, but understand the more conceptually, what it means is when you get so excited that you can no longer integrate it back with your body. What does that mean? You have, let's say, a Yom Kippur, you have an inspiring day, but the day passes, and the next day, I did mention this before, you're back to who you were the day before. What does that mean? What happened to that energy and inspiration? It left. It's not in the body anymore. It's not, in other words, it didn't integrate with the body. It was an inspiration that then left the body. Not literally, the person's still alive, but the inspiration was not grounded. It was an ungrounded experience. That's what happened to Adam and Aviv. They had such a high, but they didn't live to be able to integrate that into their daily life. Imagine someone who has such a high experience on the day the Mishkan opens and then lives their life fueled by that energy. That's amazing. But what happens if not? What happens if you're inspired and then it just floats off? And what remains is a body devoid of that light, devoid of that shine. That happens to us all the time. We get excited, right? Getting back to the experience of the golden calf, we get excited. We get excited at Sinai. We get excited. We hear the word of God. We're holding our child for the first time in our arms. We're very excited about that. We're inspired by that. Like, we promise that we'll never do this or we'll always do that. And then we find ourselves prioritizing other things. What happened to that inspiration? What happened to that soul? What happened to that inspiration? Well, maybe it floated away and it left behind something that was unintegrated with that inspiration. So again, in a subtler manner, we experience this all the time, this klot hanefesh, this ungrounded or unactualized or unchanneled inspiration that then just disconnects from reality and goes off on its own. But on a larger sense, of course, we're talking here about an experience that is so high that it almost can't be integrated. I want to speak about this now. I want to reframe the conversation, bring it back to our context, and we're going to read some inside today. I want to bring it back in the context of different forms of love of Hashem. In the Shema, this theme we've been speaking about the last few weeks, there are multiple forms of love that are mentioned. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And the way Kabbalah explains the phrase with all your might is referring to a love that is like this, like Nadav and Avihu, but with a caveat that you finish the Shema in good health. In other words, the experience should be almost like that level of passion, of love, of wanting to totally merge with God, but followed by the understanding of the integration. That is why in the Shema, if you follow the narrative, it talks about love, and then it says, These things should be al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'veisecha, v'letcha b'derech. Right? You should teach it to your children. It should be on your heart. Teach it to your kids. You should put them on your doorposts, wrap them on your arms, fill in mezuzah. In other words, don't go anywhere yet. You should feel the love, but don't forget the integration. So it's almost like experience the high of Nadav and Avihu, but also the integration that they missed out on. But don't gloss over that high. The high should be a high. You should have a real legitimate high. And what is the nature of that high? The nature of the high is to want, but not to experience, but to want to totally dissolve in the source, to totally surrender to source. It's not about me. It's not about what I get from it. It's not about wanting something from God. It's about me wanting to totally surrender to God. That is the experience of the love. Last week, I started to form the contrast between the first two loves and this third love. The first two loves are predicated on me loving God because of what God does for me. Look at, I'm alive. That's God. You're all alive. That's all God. All of this is here. God, anything that I've ever experienced in life that has been beautiful and amazing and just lovely and feels good, whatever, anything I've ever experienced in life that's been good has been God fueling that. And so I love God because I love what God does for me. That's the first type of love. Just generally speaking, that's the first category. Those two loves are the first category. Love predicated on all of the gifts that God gives me. That's a beautiful type of love. Ultimately, though, it's a love that's predicated on self. I love God for what God does for me. So it's still a little bit of self-oriented. I'm not going to say selfish, but self-oriented love. It's I love myself. I love what I have. God is what provides that for me. Therefore, I love God. So it's me, 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 me. Oh, God. So I love God vis-a-vis what I get. Okay, so that's good because I acknowledge where it's coming from and I am feeling a love for God. But again, it's all directed ultimately toward me and what I get from it. Whereas the third level, the third branding of love, which is the second category of love, the b'chol ma'odecha, with all your might, that's a love that is not at all predicated on what I get, but it's rather a love that's predicated on me surrendering to God. It's a love that drives me to want, but not to get there, but to want to dissolve in the oneness of God, to be part of God, not for my own sake, not because of what I get out of it, but because that is truth, to merge with truth and to lose even self-identity, i.e., to experience what Nadav and Avihu experienced, which is this total surrender, this total, they felt that love and it carried them all the way out. Again, I'll say this again for the third or fourth time. The disclaimer, we're not actually supposed to experience it to that extent, but at least the yearnings on some level for that, we are meant to experience. Now, with that in mind, let's jump inside. Let's read this text. It is going to be very powerful. Let's take a pass. These are very thick booklets, I'm noticing. Printed a lot of stuff. All right. Let's go. Let me find this. This is called Shuva Yisrael. Okay. Okay. You guys have this? We're starting now, chapter 3. Oh, those are extra? Perfect. Chapter 3. And the way he starts the chapter is he's going to first refer to the first two levels of love, or the first level of love. And then he's going to expand our understanding of what love is and take it to the next level. All right, here we go. Now, he says, this divine service, you guys with me? Limited love. Now, this divine service with the aforementioned love, and pause here for a moment, aforementioned love means the love that we've been talking about in chapter 2, which is v'ahavta Hashem b'chol levavcho b'chol nafshcha, with all your heart, with all your soul. Okay, so that's the first level of love. Embraces only the revealed faculties of the soul. Those of intellect and emotions, meaning it's a logical love that then spawns an emotion. Let me explain. The logical piece of it is, it comes from a logical calculation. Well, I like being alive. That's cool. Like I like being here. But how am I here? How am I alive? How am I moving? Oh, there's a soul. Well, where does that come from? It comes from God. So I love God. So so it's a love, but it's coming from a meditation, which means it's an intellectually driven experience. So it's a love that is contained within what's called the revealed faculties of the soul. It's not the essence, not the core of the soul. It's the logical part of the soul, intellect, emotions, etc. Since, third line, second sentence, since this love is spawned by comprehension and contemplation, the love is an emotion that is based on intellect, a limited type of love that is bound to the particular form of intellect that's bonded, i.e., if it's driven by a meditation, then it's limited to that meditation. So again, it's a calculated love. I love life. God provides life. I love God. Great.
Be the reverse, motion first.
Well, which human being, but where does that come from? Where does the emotion come from? With God. Where does it come from? If it's coming from the essence of the soul, that's going to be the second level of love. The first level is a very calculated love. Calculated love means it's almost like you're looking for a new car and you do the research, you read the, reviews, maybe Consumer Reports, if that still exists, right? You're reading stuff and then you come to the conclusion, all right, this car makes sense. Oh, I want this car. Now you have a desire for this car. It's all spawned by intellect, spawned by your research.
Sometimes you want the car so badly, you just.
Correct. So that's not this yet. This is still a very logical type of love. It's love that is spawned by a calculation. It's a calculated love. I love life. Life is generated by God. Okay, so I love God then. God's the source of all this. Great. Let's continue. In general, this love does not lend itself to the idea of boundlessness. That means it's not an infinite, it's not a limitless type of love. I.e., it does not lead a person to a state of klot hanefesh. There you go, that's that phrase. It does not lead a person to not even want to be here, as it is a love defined by the verse as to love the Lord your God, for he is your life. And klot hanefesh is the antithesis of life. If you love life because you've made the calculation that if you love God, not love life, if you love God because you recognize that you love life and God is life, well, then your love of God is predicated on your love of life, which means that you're not going to love God more than your life. That's not going to happen, right? If the love of God begins because I love my life, I love this. This is all from God. I love God who gives me all this. Great. It will never lead me to surrender all of this, because then I no longer love God. I only love God because of what I get. So why am I going to let all that go? I'm not going to let that go. This love will never, it's like almost laws of physics on a roller coaster. You will never, your second hill will never be as big as your first hill. That's the way it works. Unless there's another pull up. You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You get into the roller coaster. You go up yes. Anybody been on a roller, right? You go up, then you go down, right? You go down this, so it goes 200 feet up in the air. You go down 200 feet. Guess what? Your next hill is not 200 feet. It can't go back up to the same height. You've lost energy. You're only going to be able to go about 100 feet now, right? Your second hill is going to be shorter than your original one. That's always how it works. You cannot love God more than the rationale for loving God dictates. If the rationale for loving God is because God gives me life, then why will I ever surrender my life for God? That doesn't even make sense. Okay, let's continue. I hope that makes sense. Thus, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down from that second paragraph. Thus, this love in general is limited. Likewise, the specifics of this love are also limited. Not just generally is limited, but specifically it's limited. Since the love always reflects the intellect that gives rise to it, and since the intellect is self-oriented, I love my life, I therefore love God, it will always be tethered to my love of self. Now, all of the above is a result of contemplating. It's almost like, again, just we said this last week, but just to do it again, it's like if you love a person because of what they do for you, well, you're not going to love them beyond what they do for you. I mean, if you love them deeper than that, that's great. That's ideal. As we'll speak over here about God as well. But if you only love them for what they do for you, well, then you're not going to love them beyond what they're doing for you. If they're not doing for you, then you don't love them anymore. It's always okay. Now, all back inside third paragraph, bottom of page 62. Now, all the above is a result of contemplating the godly light that relates to the worlds and is vested within the worlds to enliven them. In other words, because you're focusing on God in the context of giving life to me and to reality. Nonetheless, all of this is but a glimmer of godliness, meaning it's a small ray of light of what God truly is, which bears no comparison whatsoever to his essence and being. For as is known, any aspect of godly light that functions as a root and source for the worlds is only an aspect of radiance and glimmer of godliness, but not the real deal. Even the primordial root and source of the worlds is regarded as a single thought. As the saying, with a single thought were the worlds created. Concerning this, we say, blessed is he who spoke, and the world came into being, which refers to but a single utterance. So whether the world is created by one thought of God or one word of God, either way, what our sages are trying to relate to us is that creation, this role that God assumes as creator and sustainer of life, does not define who God is. This is something that God does for our benefit, but it's not who God is. And he explains it now with a human example. Just as a single thought is completely insignificant in relation to the true essence of being of the person, right? Imagine, does one of your thought, you had a thought, does that capture your entire being? Of course not. It's one thought, right? So it's insignificant in relation to the true essence of being of a person after the M-. Now, since a single thought is completely null, meaning insignificant, even in relation to the faculty of cognition in the person, which is capable of thinking endlessly, and how much more so is a single thought insignificant in relation to the essence of the soul. Similarly, and even more so, is this, we're on page 66, is a single thought of creation completely insignificant in relation to the essence and being of the Ein Sof light. God's thought or God's words to create all of what we see here are completely, insignificant. When we say insignificant, it doesn't mean that God doesn't care about this world. It means that it's enaroch, it's incomparable to the essence of God himself. For as we say in the prayers each morning, you were the same before the world was created. You are the same since the world was created. I, God, have not changed whatsoever, since God is completely beyond comparison with creation and with a single thought of creation. And through the aforementioned divine service that engenders a love of God with all your heart and with all your soul, which arises from contemplating the godly radiance and glimmer that relates to the worlds, a person elicits only a revelation that corresponds to this level. So let me explain. If a person is thinking about God as God creates this, so we begin the meditation very simply. I am alive. I love being alive. God gives me life. I therefore love God. That's the totality of the meditation. Great. So now you're in love with God. That's a good thing. But recognize the limitations. First of all, it's about you. I'm alive, therefore I love God. Okay, so it's still about you and what you're getting from God. But it's also relating to God as the provider of life. God's a little bit beyond that also. God is not just the creator. God is God. Now, what does that look like? Well, I can't describe that because all we know is what we know. We only see what God gives us, right? But can we be so arrogant as to say that the totality of God is only as God exists as a creator? God doesn't have any reality beyond that. I used the example last week of a parent and a child. The child says, well, my parent is only a parent. That's all they are. Their only reality is as my parent. That's not true. They are a person who is a parent, and maybe a parent is a central part of their reality. That might be true, but it's not the totality of their being. To say about God that the totality of God's being is God providing me life, is extremely narrow-minded, narrow-visioned, and almost arrogant to project, that's to create God in our image. Say, God only exists vis-a-vis my reality. God doesn't exist outside of me. God only exists in my atoms giving me life. Outside of that, there's no God. Really? God is only me? So the first type of love, even though it's a beautiful love, it's you're loving God, you're thinking about God, you're aware of God, but it's still limited and it's still only related to God vis-a-vis creation and as creator. And we have to contrast this now with the deeper form of love, with all your might. However, bottom paragraph 66, however, the divine service amid love of God with all your might, oh, that is one that involves the soul's very essence and being, which transcends the revealed faculties of the soul. As is known, the intellectual and emotive faculties that are vested and radiate openly within a person are only a glimmer of the soul. The primary element of the soul, however, remains on high. It is not even an encompassing state over the soul residing in the body. There are parts of us that are not even consciously within us, meaning there are parts of our soul that remain beyond our own limited experience. Regarding this level of the soul, it is said that it clings and cleaves to you, alluding to the essence of the soul that is bound to and united with the essence of Ein Sof, its root and source. The essence of the soul is the level called Yechida, which cleaves to the Yachid, the one and only God. So here he starts describing there's another part of the soul. There's a part of the soul that we're aware of, the part of the soul that thinks and feels and is logical, and the part of the soul that we're very much aware of. But then there's a part of our soul, the essence of our soul, the Yechida, that is completely unified with God. It's this level of Yechida that drove Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, to want to leave everything behind, because that part of the soul is and wants only that connection with God and wants to leave everything behind, doesn't care about anything else. When this level, second paragraph, and here we go, when this level of the soul, it's not even level of the soul. Level implies that it's a level. When this essence of the soul shines forth and is revealed, one's divine service reaches a state of literal kolot hanefesh. Now, you know what that phrase means, right? That's when the soul kind of transcends. The soul expires with a consuming and outpouring of its whole essence and being, with a consuming and outpouring of its whole essence to the essence and being of the blessed Ein Sof, i.e., the totality of its essential being and existence is nullified. This then is the deeper meaning of loving God with all your might. The term moed, the term ma'od, not moed. The term ma'od indicates that this love of God is not at all in the realm of limitation. Consequently, one's entire being is completely nullified. This love of God is not like the love with all your heart mentioned above, which is restricted by the intellectual and emotive faculties of the soul. For during this love and yearning, one is still a definable something. Although he is in a state of yearning and longing for godliness, nevertheless, his entire being is not nullified by it. And these points are interdependent. Since the love is a limited one, he's not in a state where his entire being is completely nullified to God. Rather, he is something that exists. We're going to stop here. Today. And I hope we read a lot, and I hope that you didn't that the text, but also the point of the text is very clear, because it is pretty straightforward. We are contrasting two forms of love that we say every day, multiple times a day in the Shema. There's loving God because you're alive, and loving God because God is truth. And those are two different experiences. If I love God because of me, then ultimately it's self-oriented. It's about me, it's about what I get, and it will never drive me to sacrifice anything for God. It just won't drive, it does not drive sacrifice. It's a love that's very selfish. Imagine a parent who says, I love my kids so long as they don't wake me up in the middle of the night. I love my kids only insofar as what they do for me. The moment that it requires me to go outside of my comfort zone, for them, game over, deal over, I'm out. I only love my kids vis-a-vis what I get. In other words, I look at them as these are people, small, cute people that are going to give me joy, that are going to give me happiness. I'm looking for them to give me something. If that's the starting point, then it's not going to drive sacrifice or surrender. Where does sacrifice and surrender come from? A deeper place. Not a place of what's in it for me, but a place of connection with them. So there's two dimensions of the soul. There's a dimension of the soul that's very much rational and very much logical and very much self-oriented. I exist. I like my life. God gives me the blessings. I therefore love God, but it's still about me. That's never going to drive me to surrender my comfort for God. I'll only do the mitzvah if it makes sense. I'll only show up if it feels good. It's very much dependent, my relationship with God. And that, the proof is in the pudding. Which mitzvot am I doing or which ones am I not doing? The ones that make sense or feel good, I'm in. If it's a little, if I don't understand it, or if I feel uncomfortable, I'm not going to do it. Where does that come from? A love that's predicated on me. So if it's predicated about me and what I get, so it's never going to go beyond that. It's the second hill of the roller coaster. It's never going to surpass the starting point. The starting point is here. It's never going to go up there. It's not going to climb beyond. If my love, however, is not predicated on what I get, but on the fact that my soul at its core is connected with God's essence that transcends all calculations. And my soul wants, like none of an abuse, not actually going to happen, but my soul wants to completely dissolve in that, not because of a selfish motivation, but because that's truth. Well, then, even as I'm here living my life, I'll be open to those moments that call upon me to transcend, to surrender, to do something outside my comfort zone. So now there's a mitzvah opportunity, but it's calling upon me to stretch beyond what's comfortable. So now the question is my relationship to God predicated on my comfort, or is it predicated on God? The Shema says there's two types of love. You can love God, ki hu chayecha, because he gives you everything. Then the nature of that love is about getting and about being comfortable. Or are you loving God b'chol modecha, which means unlimited, infinite, no matter what. The nature of commitment, ideally, when you commit to something, is ideally even when it's uncomfortable. Because if it's only when it's comfortable, so then why do I have to commit? You don't need to commit if it's comfortable. You commit to something so that even when it's uncomfortable, you're committed to do it. That's the purpose of a commitment. Again, if it feels good, you would do it without a commitment. So why do you need to make a commitment? You only make a commitment. Why do countries make treaties? Why do you make a treaty? If you're getting along, you're getting along. You only make a treaty for when you're not getting along, or for when there might be reason to not get along, to still make sure that you do it anyway, even though you don't want to do it. What happened at Sinai? God says, I want you to commit to this. Not because it feels good, not because you like it. Because what happens if you wake up in the morning and you're not interested? But you're still committed.
So it's like the guy with parking space.
Yeah. Even when you no longer have the motivation. Exactly.
Sacrificing to love God, the good he gives you and the bad, right?
Yeah. Or the good he gives you. Yeah, you could say and the bad. Yeah. Meaning the and the bad, because it's not about what you're getting. It's just about God.
Is that the aim or no? Is that
Say it again, is that the one?
the nullification?
Yeah. You're saying, is that the b'chol modecha piece of it?
Yeah, is that not the aim or no?
Oh, ein omavada. Yeah, you could say that, right? The idea that there's nothing else. It's not about me. It's not about what I get. It's not about the world. Anything that's predicated on self is ultimately going to be limited by my feeling comfortable. When it's about God and there's no other true reality, then I'm not going to get in the way of myself. And so those are the two experiences. By the way, you might understand these two loves as love of water and love of fire. It says in Tanya, there's two types of love that's compared to water and love that's compared to fire. Water love, it's a weird expression, is love that's about me, right? It's a love that keeps me kind of complacent, that keeps me, grounded. Love like fire is like, again, almost like Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron. It's like love that takes me beyond my comfort zone, takes me outside, takes me, beyond the normative. It allows me to surrender. In life, it's so important to have both levels of love. We have to love ourselves. It's a healthy human being loves self, and to notice what feels good, what doesn't feel good. That's important. You can't live life only in a state of surrender. That's not sustainable. That's, again, like Nadav and Avihu. They're no longer with us. I mean, it's not a sustainable, it's not a grounded life. But to say that I'm going to go live 120 years and never stretch myself beyond my comfort zone, to never commit to something, to never follow through with something that pushes me to do something that's uncomfortable, that's not going to help me, but it's only going to help someone else, to never experience that type of commitment is also to do ourselves a disservice. So in the Shema, we say to love God because he's your life and because he's the truth. Yeah.
There are levels of commitment. I mean, I often wonder, I know people who say, I identify as a Jew, I am Jewish, I love being Jewish, but they don't do anything that is Jewish. They don't keep kosher, they don't observe.
So without looking at anybody else, I think the important thing is to think about ourselves. No, it's not, I can't comment on anybody else. I can comment on myself. I know for myself, and I think all of us know for ourselves, that we have areas in which we are committed to, in a sense, and which we do Jewishly or in relationships, whatever it is, in which we're very careful with, and we're very excited about, because we're excited about. But sometimes we find ourselves struggling with the things that push us outside of the comfort zone. Sometimes we find ourselves confronted with a mitzvah opportunity or in a relationship commitment opportunity. It's like, do I really want to give up my Sunday to help my friend move? Do I really want to give it up? Like, do I really want to go to a meeting tonight at 8:00, for a program or whatever it is, when there's a playoff game happening? And I'm speaking for myself, right? Like, is that really, like, how excited am I about that? But you know what? You do it. Why? Because we have both. We understand what we need. We also understand that there are things that are beyond our needs, things that are beyond ourselves, that there are things that are a little bit more important even than our own comfort. No one's asking to be like Nadav and Avihu. God never says do that. God says, on the contrary, don't do that. But what we are asked is to love God on these two levels. When it's good, as you said, when it's good, and even when it doesn't feel so good.
When you are at your least, when you're feeling vulnerable, that's in your growth.
Yes.
And bad analogy, but it's like a lobster.
Yes.
That is down, and
Yeah.
that's in the growth, right?
Yes.
Wow.
Dr. Torska's analogy. I will say this. Merle's touching on a very important point. We could have looked at this from another angle today. If you read any modern book, not any modern book, but like about growth, even books like, the names, the titles of the books, whatever. So much about a growth mindset is about, pushing yourself. It's about having experiences. How many inspirational speakers are, the famous ones that are having you walk on coals after a weekend, you spend $50,000 to then walk on hot coals. And the whole point is to stretch you beyond your comfort zone. Look at this. Sunday morning, did the same thing. No coals necessary. And you get to keep your shoes on. Isn't that amazing? And you get to save your money, huh? No, so that's the point. The point is to understand that Hashem sometimes asks us, Hashem sometimes calls on us and asks us to go beyond.
But not to the point of Nadav.
Oh, not to the point of the review. But to be in that modality where we're not only thinking about what's comfortable for us. Listen, anyone who has, I'm going back to the parenting thing because, I don't know, it seems to me like the clearest example. And especially for mothers, fathers also a little bit, sorry dads, but especially for mothers, the commitment, the amount, I've seen it with my wife and I've seen it with the commitment and the dedication to be a mom and to just, is just incredible. It's for so long and in so many situations, it is not about you. For 9 months, it's not about you. You're carrying a life inside of you. You're like the different experience. I am anyway, bottom line. What's the bottom line? this week, homework this week. Experience both. First of all, when you say the Shema at one time this week, we say Shema at least a few times a day, 2 times a day, 7 days, 14 times at least. So you have about 14 opportunities to say Shema, morning and night for 7 days. At one time of those 14, pick your favorite. Say Shema and think about it as you're saying the first paragraph. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Think about these 2 categories. With all your heart, with all your soul. Category 1, I love God because of what God gives me. I'm in love with God because who wouldn't be in love with God? You get all this, all these perks, all these benefits. Life is amazing. God gives it to me. I love God. And then, love God not because of what he gives you. Love God because God is truth. God is reality. God is not this reality. God is beyond. And that evokes the surrender. So one evokes the God is here with me, and one evokes the greater than. And then have that inform one moment this week. Do a mitzvah and really enjoy it, and commit to a mitzvah that is beyond your understanding or feeling, just because. Stretch yourself with one mitzvah. All right. Homework. Oh, also homework. Homework this week is join us for this course. Register for this course. If you've studied Talmud, you will love this. If you've never studied Talmud, you will definitely love this. 400 pages. This is my book. This is the teacher's manual. You will get your own book. 400 pages of wisdom and insight. I'm telling you, you do not want to miss this course starting Wednesday at noon, Wednesday at 7:30 p.m., 2 times day and night, in person, online, live, and also after the class as well with the recordings. All right. Oh, I should also mention tomorrow night. Join us. Lecture and book signing. The author, Rabbi Elisha Pearl of Make Peace. Very timely conversation. There's a lot of stuff going on now in Israel. Hostages have been released and over the Baruch Hashem yesterday, 4 hostages. There were 3 a few days before that. Tremendous blessings coupled with tremendous anxiety of releasing hundreds of terrorists, convicted murderers, etc. It's a complicated. There's nothing simple about Israel, nothing simple about Middle East. Here we have an author who is a brilliant guy, but who also put together the Rebbe's insights based on Torah, wrote a book, a best-selling book called Make Peace. And he's going to be here tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m., to speak about the book and to sign copies and discuss what's going on the ground. All right, so join me then. It's going to be very, very powerful evening. All right, questions, comments? Good?
Yashakala.
Thank you very much. Wow.
Wonderful.
All right, Dr. Maxey, good to see you. Good to see you. Frank, good to see you. Matt, I didn't say hi to Matt. Matt from Kansas. Matt, are we in Kansas still anymore? Kidding. That's to borrow the phrase.
Yeah.
Hey,
still here.
great to see you. Awesome. How's life?
Oh, it is terrific. The snow that fell, we had 20 inches of snow about 3 weeks ago. It's finally starting to thaw.
Oh my gosh, I totally was not thinking about how much snow you got. That's an insane amount of snow. That's 2 feet. We got snow, but not 2 feet. We got this city. Listen, let's be honest. Hold on, Sandrine. Was Tamima closed last week? It never closed? Wednesday. Okay. That was for okay, that was for 1 inch. 1 inch 1 day. 20 inches, that would be like 20 days. I'm saying if the ratio holds. All right, well, stay safe over there. Mariana, great to see you. Wow, it looks like summer there, right? It's summer by you. Good. Mariana, great to see you. Ray, welcome. Ray, I'm going to give you a call. All right, good to see you all. Take care. Shavua Tov.